A new feature on our new Weed Talk News is going to be these one-on-one, up-to-the-minute interviews with movers and shakers in the cannabis industry. And when we think about movers and shakers, we always think of Morgan Fox, the Director of Government Relations for NORML out of Washington, D.C. And Morgan, as always, good to see you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jim.
Hey, so Friday, March 15th was a big day in the uh, cannabis history, the fight to end prohibition, because VP Kamala Harris entertained some key advocates in the White House. And one of them was Chris Goldstein from NORML, who you know obviously well because he's a comrade. And you interviewed last week as well. What were the reactions to that meeting? And obviously, Chris's story is pretty compelling because he's one of those federal convicted non-felons, but felon misdemeanors anyway, that was pardoned by President Biden earlier in the first time I actually heard him actually mention the word cannabis or marijuana.
Well, I think it's really important to note that this is really some of the best reception that we've gotten from any sitting president or any presidential administration in the past. Just the Biden pardons and call for scheduling review alone place him far ahead of the rest of the pack. So I think that following up on that, it's just as important to point out that this is a sign that the administration is not only actively looking to build on its successes so far and to highlight them. I think this really shows that a lot of the stigma surrounding cannabis policy reform is starting to erode. But what's really important here is looking at who we're actually talking about. Neither President Biden or Vice President Harris have really stellar histories when it comes to the war on drugs and prohibition. And the fact that these individuals are coming around and using the power that they have in some of the highest positions in the land to enact real change, I think is really important, something that people should take note of and really try to elicit better responses or better information about exactly how they got there, because a large swath of the American public has gotten there already. So now the next steps are really just keeping pressure on the White House to further build upon their successes so far, to make sure that the people that are eligible for the pardons actually know about it, to expand the scope of those pardons to include people who are not currently eligible, and to actively pursue clemency for people that are currently incarcerated on nonviolent federal marijuana charges.
Absolutely. One right after another. There's too many in jail right now that need to be freed. One of the things that I picked up from your remarks and also from what Chris talked about was the atmosphere, the scene in the Roosevelt room with the Vice President of the United States basically saying in her opening statement was, we need to legalize cannabis or we need to legalize marijuana. And he was so taken by that moment because he's gone through, he's been a protester, he's been in the trenches for many, many years. It really was a big deal to him, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And I think also a sign that we have some opportunities right now to continue to push cannabis policy reforms larger than those that have already happened to a receptive audience that has a lot of power to be able to enact such changes. Although there are certainly limitations to the power of the president. I think that it's important to point out that a pardon is not an expungement, but the president doesn't actually have expungement powers. But there is more that the president can do that is within the scope of his powers that we are going to be urging the administration to pursue as quickly as possible. And I think that doing so is going to really assure voters in the coming election that the Biden administration is serious about pursuing these changes.
And he tried to work within the system of the various federal agencies who have authority over this, including the DEA, which is notorious for taking their time. He did put them on a clock, a deadline, and of course they blew that off the end of the calendar year. But now, what else can executive action bring if the DEA continues to drag its feet and the president wants to make a splash before that November election?
Well, I think one of the very viable options, as I said, was just promoting these pardons more broadly so that people can actually get their certificates and be able to show potential employers, et cetera, who might be skeptical about or promoting some stigma against the fact that they're a cannabis convict, that they have been pardoned by the president. But those charges will still show up on the record, but it definitely helps in many cases. And there are lifelong collateral consequences associated with these convictions that can touch on everything from employment, housing, education to parental rights. So it's really important to, at the very least, have these pardons in place. But expanding the pool of people that are eligible, the president already did this once. The original pardon announcement happened in October of 2022, and then that was followed up by an expansion of those pardons, along with explicitly noting that people that have been arrested and charged on things like national parks would be eligible. And it also extended the date up until the point where those pardons were granted, because these pardon announcements always have a cutoff date. So it's something that I think we need to continuously see happen, but also expanding those pardons to people that have nonviolent cannabis felonies in the federal system. Federal law enforcement agencies arrest very few people on misdemeanor possession charges. The vast majority of those arrests are taking place under felony provisions at the federal level, at least. Obviously, at the state and local level, possession vast outstrips everything else. And also outstrips what's going on in terms of federal enforcement. But by extending those pardons, I think that we can greatly expand the pool of people that are eligible for pardons, whether they were granted probation or whether they've already served their sentence in incarceration. But I think it's also really important to really start actively pursuing those clemency petitions that are out there for nonviolent cannabis offenses for which people are currently incarcerated. The pardon announcements did not free a single person from jail or prison at the federal level, but there are dozens of open clemency petitions currently submitted to the Department of Justice and to the White House. And the administration should begin taking action on those immediately, as well as I'm sure the many, many more that have not applied for clemency that might be eligible for it under a different rubric.
Yeah, and let's talk about the scheduling now, because we know the Health and Human Services has urged the DEA and actually encouraged them to move cannabis off Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. But the industry would be far more enthused, if you will, if it was completely descheduled from that Controlled Substances Act. And it's something I've said, I think at this point, because we know so much about all the other controlled substances, maybe it's time to rewrite what those schedules really are. But let's not worry about that. Can the president deschedule cannabis with an executive action?
Not unilaterally. The DEA has final say on any sort of a scheduling review. And while the president could exert significant power to influence the DEA's decision, that's not really politically viable at this point. And yeah, I mean, and also, I just don't think that the president is quite there yet. But I think that this is going to be something that really comes down to Congress. Congress created the CSA. Congress has been charged with expanding it, and Congress is ultimately going to have to address this, because I think that in order to get to descheduling, it's probably not going to happen through administrative review. We just have too many entrenched prohibitionists at the DEA for that to be a reality without cleaning house, which is probably not going to happen. But I think that it is very possible that the president could actually just simply publicly promote that the DEA will deschedule. Again, I don't necessarily think he's quite there yet, but that is something the president could do and apply more public pressure for descheduling, and something that we are urging him to do immediately, but also putting pressure on Congress to do the same. This is an issue that enjoys 70% support among the American people, and yet it's one that continuously gets deprioritized by Congress. I think sending a strong message to lawmakers from the Oval Office that they need to start prioritizing this issue would have a great effect. And I think, honestly, would show the American people that Congress is still capable of legislating.
Just barely. How many times have they saved the government from shutting down over the last 6 months? And they seem to be more focused on keeping it going, but is anything getting done? Let's not go there. I really don't like the pointing of fingers from one side of the aisle to the other side of the aisle. I think we've really lost our way as a country to find that common ground and to find the fairness that would certainly accompany descheduling a plant medicine that's been, used medicinally for thousands of years on this earth, and now, of course, is tied up in the alphabet gobbledygook that is our federal government with the HSS, DEA, USAG. I mean, pick any pick. Everybody has a say in what happens in this industry, and all the industry wants is to be treated fairly. It's got to be frustrating at this point, is it?
I mean, I'm not as concerned about the industry as I am about consumers, who have traditionally borne the brunt of this policy. But you were talking about common ground. This is common ground for more than two-thirds of America, and for more than half of Americans, it represents an ongoing conflict between the law of the states in which they reside and the federal government, and it needs to be resolved as quickly as possible.
Another thing that Chris brought up was the fact that descheduling at the state level hasn't even happened in a few states. That was news to me.
Yeah, a lot of states have their own scheduling system. Most of the time, it parallels the federal system. But yeah, there are legal states. Can't think of them off the top of my head, but there are several legal states that, despite the fact that they've made cannabis legal, haven't changed their own internal schedules for various reasons.
Yeah. And I should have checked my own native state of Massachusetts to see what happened. But during this week, the governor of Massachusetts made a very big public announcement that she was going to pardon all past nonviolent cannabis convictions in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Having a governor actually respond to what the president asked for, Governor Healy was very proud to say that she thinks she's the first one to do it. We don't need to refute that as much as how big a deal was this nationally, what Massachusetts did last week.
Well, it's certainly very important to have state governors standing up for this sort of change. I mean, again, I should point out that a pardon is not the same as expungement, and there are currently about 24 states that are actively working to facilitate expungement of cannabis-related records. So this is certainly nothing new, and there are other states that are doing more in terms of actually clearing people's records as opposed to simply giving them a pardon. But symbolically, I think this is a sign that people are starting to wake up, and especially the politicians are not shying away from doing this, making these very popular and justice-oriented changes that really need to happen to help repair the harms that have been caused by prohibition to the greatest extent possible.
How can we educate our elected officials more about this? I know you guys do a great job in the trenches, but it just sometimes I just feel it falls on deaf ears.
Well, one great way is to go to normal.org/act, where you can contact your lawmakers very easily on a number of issues at both the state and federal level. But really, it's just reaching out and contacting your lawmakers. While they don't always listen to their constituents, they do pay attention to their constituents.
There you go. And that is the idea of a democracy and a republic like we have here in the United States, which is still, of course, the greatest nation in the world. Just ask anyone. But let's talk about kind of a dark thing that I've learned about what's going on in the struggle towards legalization, if you will, at the state level. Is we're starting to see stories about Chinese nationals, organized crime from China, coming into the United States, buying land and going into the legacy or illegal cannabis market, which obviously is a slap in the face to the legal market and all the people that have put thousands, if not millions of dollars into this cause. What can NORML do? What can anybody do about stopping that influx of Chinese organized crime in the United States running the legacy world?
Well, I think it's a repeated tragedy that popular culture and politicians in particular continue to try to demonize cannabis through its association with specific racial or national groups. We've seen this since the very beginning of Prohibition, and it continues apace today. I think that we really need to look beyond whatever organized crime organizations may be active in the illicit cannabis market at any point, and look at the root causes, which are prohibition. The fact that we still don't have national prohibition, and the fact that, or we still don't have national legalization, and the fact that we still have a number of states that continue to criminalize cannabis, and even some legal states have not created a market in which regulated businesses can survive and thrive. These are all providing footholds, and this is not an issue that is endemic to cannabis, and it's certainly not an issue that's particularly endemic or caused by legalization. This is a simple fact that there is demand for a product that in many cases is illegal, and there are people willing to supply that product at legal risk. Who they happen to be, I think, is inconsequential, because we've always seen various transnational drug trafficking organizations involved in the unregulated and illicit cannabis markets for time immemorial.
Right. And that would be Mexico and Colombia, just off the top of my head, in this country.
Canada for a long time.
And Canada for a long time. And they're Canada's slowly emerging as maybe getting some of the things they do the right thing. And there's actually more encouraging news coming from Canada than I expected over the last few weeks, few months, if not. Morgan Fox, Director of Government Relations of NORML, thank you so much for checking in with us at least monthly to find out what the heck is going on as we move towards an acceptance, a normalization, if not legalization and decriminalization of cannabis. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
What if we're right? What if all of a sudden they discovered that there is medical use for marijuana and that it is good for you and it's better than alcohol and it's better than opioids and it helps your health? What if we're right? What if they find that out?
Specific cannabinoids have medical value. These are facts.
I'm here today in hopes to assist in removing the demonized stigma of cannabis and the perception that cannabis is just about getting high. The true base of this plant has to be known.
I don't think anybody should ever go to jail for cannabis. Get some medicine, and everybody should have access to it.
This is something which, at the very, very least, is the key to alleviating suffering and extending life for millions of human beings. Right? For returning some kind of balance to our society, and quite possibly of restoring our planet's natural balance as well.